Hello everyone, and welcome. We are glad that you are here tonight as we continue our participation in the Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow Program. And our visiting fellow is Dr. Anita Perez Ferguson from California. She arrived on Sunday afternoon from Santa Barbara and will be here with us through Friday morning, engaging, exchanging, dialoguing, discussing with our students. In the past 2 days, she has had a full agenda. She's met and shared conversation with students of all ages, from a third grader who she had a chance to meet on Sunday night, to all of the students throughout our undergraduate and graduate programs has had a chance to visit with them. In one class last night, and I must share this with you, the students wouldn't let her go. She began to tell about one experience and then another, and the students were students in Spencer Cunningham's class. It was a capstone class, and these are all students who are involved in the fine arts. They're graphic design students, and they're getting their portfolios ready to present and be part of the market, part of the world. And questions became excited answers, and answers led to more questions and more complicated and interesting turns in the way that one moves from an idea to completion of an idea. Her reflections, her sage and witty advice fascinate, engage, inspire, and set examples of endurance. And that might have been the key word that came out in much of what we talked about last night as she visited with the students. Endurance, to persevere, to continue, determination in the process of trial and error. Her message of resilience is indeed for everyone. She's a professor at the Martin B. Smith School of Business and Economics at California State University, the Channel Islands. It's a public university known for its interdisciplinary, multicultural, and international perspectives, and its emphasis on experiential and service learning. She's teaching out there, and she will meet with one group of her students later tonight via a video conferencing. The students are putting together a mock boardroom setting. And so that's an experience for the students to have their professor all the way across the country in another state where it's pleasantly warm and very nice. Although I heard snow was coming, which is something that our visitor experienced in Denver on her way here from California. The plane had to be de-iced in Denver so she could continue on into Columbus, Ohio. Based on her extraordinary leadership and organizational skills that resulted in 2 tightly contested congressional campaigns in California, she was appointed by President Clinton to serve as Inter-American Foundation Chair, and it was confirmed by the U.S. Senate. She formerly served as a National Women's Political Caucus President and as White House liaison to the U.S. Department of Transportation. She has served on Planned Parenthood Federation of the American Board of Directors. She is indeed a multi-talented, fascinating individual with stories to share for all of us, and with roads to follow. And the roads begin with you as an individual, and they begin with your faith, and they begin with the ability to communicate and the ability to listen. So we are in a good position now to spend some time listening and engaging with our guests. Please welcome Dr. Anita Perez Ferguson.
Thank you so much. I have a confession to make right off the bat. I am an Oiler. My high school was the Oilers team, and I was a cheerleader Oiler. So I'm ready to move in here. I've got all the routines down, and I'm ready to roll. Actually, I'm always finding myself expanding even the most lovely introductions, thank you very much, to let you know that my name is actually Anita Maria Perez de Gonzalez Ferguson. And I tell you that, first, it's true. Secondly, I love Mr. Ferguson and have for over 47 years as his wife. But the bigger story is about the changing demographics in the United States of America. The fact that we are seeing a multiplicity of international individuals joining our country as we had in the last century, the early part of the 1900s and the late part of the 1800s. We are seeing languages emerge in our streets and markets and classrooms. That's not English only, but many types of languages, many customs. I am a living, breathing example of that. All of my grandparents were from Mexico. I'm a second-generation Mexican-American. And I am proud of that and curious about it. My stories and my interests and my scholarship derive from that interest. Life is complicated, and it continues to change and get more complicated. And what I want to do tonight is take us from some of that complexity to a singleness of mind and purpose that will lead us through the changes that come no matter what they are. Now, I'm a Southern California person, no matter what your opinion of Southern California, I'm the genuine article. And when we live and study by the sea, we know that sailors say, I do not know which way the wind will blow, but I know how to set my sail. There are changes that come to us moment to moment in life, day by day, year by year, and some of them create rough weather. If you know how to set your sail, you can manage the changes. You can ride with the winds. The buffeting of the storm will come, but you'll make it through. That's where I want to go tonight with you. We start with the complexity, and the complexity is up on that screen. So the first person to figure that out, I could give a Tootsie Roll if I had one up here. It comes from that Hispanic heritage or Latino heritage or Chicano heritage or all the other terms that have come through the ages to talk about Latin American influence and coming into our traditionally American culture. And what I experienced in my time in Washington, D.C., was that it was a rare individual who came to leadership with a Latino background, and I was curious to know what happened afterwards, after that leadership time in Washington. Well, I noticed a number of individuals moving through to business and corporate positions on corporate boards. And as I began my work on my PhD in organizational development, I focused my study on corporate boards and how they were, or were they, diversified in terms of ethnic and racial composition. This very complicated graphic is telling us the story of how individuals reach a seat on the Fortune 500 boards of directors. Some would say more powerful than most of the leaderships in countries around the world. The Fortune 500 boards, as you know, make decisions that affect all of our lives through the corporate entities, through the interactions that they have, through the financial worlds. And it all comes down to us. Well, what I found, and this is the small portion of my speech, but I have to show you that I am Dr. Ferguson and know how to do my research. What I found by using 3 sources was that there were certain networks that existed. Now, we can say, well, you didn't have to get a PhD to know there's a good old boys network. Everybody knows that. But the thing is that there are certain doors to pass through. And I delved into the discovery of how individuals got onto the corporate boards, especially individuals that came from diverse, or we used to say minority backgrounds. Okay. So this is a network analysis, the final scheme after arranging 35 elements of 72 members of the Fortune 500, all of whom happen to have Hispanic surnames like myself, men and women. The SEC publishes the profiles of all the corporate directors. The Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility identifies and honors all corporate board members from Hispanic heritage. Fortune 500 lists the profiles and the connections of all Fortune 500 boards of directors in a special edition every year. Those were my primary sources of information about these board members, and so I captured all the data from each of these three sources, one public, the SEC, two private, the Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility and Fortune magazine. What I found was that the network profiles for Hispanic members of the boards of directors were substantially different than those for non-Hispanic or traditionally Caucasian members of the boards of directors. And these little networks start to show some of the relationships that individuals had. The person in the very middle that's got, you can see Shell Oil over the right shoulder, the Shell Oil symbol, got to know the person on top there. And then she related that person to another person down below. All of these little network exchanges began to show up, shared in common on a network analysis. So if you knew somebody, say you were here in Findlay, and knew somebody that was working with the Boys and Girls Club, and also was associated with the firefighters, all of a sudden these little branches go out. And I began to track it all to see which organizations were kind of the gatekeepers for that. Well, I found out that there were three streams of relationships, and the study itself is called Caminos. Now, Caminos is the Spanish word technically for roads or pathways. And so the work of network analysis was called the Pathways of Latinos Serving on the Fortune 500. This chart speaks to all of us, Democrats and Republicans, because I wanted to check and see how party affiliation figures into this, and whether or not so many of the divisions that we feel in our country at this time are actually happening on paper, or whether there's a lot of cross relationships going on here as well. So my top circle, the blue circle, is the Democrats, and the bottom is the GOP, Republicans. And I began to see the networks of the male and female boards of directors members and how they all crossed through that group in the middle. Networks and pathways, caminos, that people had in the Hispanic community of getting onto these boards. That's a blank one. The third piece of work that I did, I thought, well, if that's how Latinos or Hispanics get on the corporate boards of directors, what's the difference between them and another group? And I started to look at the African American community to see how many seats are held by African Americans on corporate boards and what are the routes that they take. On the right-hand side, Fusion and Saks Fifth Avenue, the Academy of Achievement, the Omega Phi fraternity, all of these were linking groups for African Americans serving on the boards of directors. On the far right were other groups that were associated with Democrats, and then they met in the middle through certain core groups. So the Caminos Survey was the first actually ever done in the history of the country, not surprisingly, because in the year 2005, we had a significant number of minority participation on boards of directors in the Fortune 500, and I was one of the first to ever survey the connectedness and how people reached these positions. This map has gone further into more recruitment efforts, not just to know how things happen, what happened in the past, but to be used in corporate boardrooms as they begin to recruit and nominate new members. And the research found that there were 3 avenues that came, and now boards of directors are looking in 3 areas. The first was predictable, and it was through the corporate ladder. Individuals like a graduate here from Finley who comes up through as a CPA or through another accounting division like we were talking at dinner may rise up over the course of her career to be in the C-suite, to be a VP in a corporation, and to be nominated to be on the board at a certain point. It was the corporate person, okay, that built their career there and ended up on the board of directors. But there were 2 other routes that were unusual for minority persons. The second was that they served on community boards as volunteers. It could have been, and often was, the Boys and Girls Club throughout the United States. It could have been a Little League type of arrangement where there were coaches and whatnot. And what happened was that they would meet other individuals in the community, the banker or the lawyer or an individual that was serving on a corporate board, and they would meet in that way, and then they'd be recruited from a community organization. But the third group that was so unusual, and it makes me kind of happy and proud to think of it, is the group that was in the fine arts. 1/3 of the directors that came through the boards were in the fine arts because their expression in the community was through music, dance, painting, other expressions of fine arts that held with their own ethnic heritage. And through those items, they were recognized in the community to become leaders and then introduced to corporate boards. The fact is there were thousands of minorities in that community, but it was the leaders of the fine arts institutions that became known to the community in general. And also, I should say, were appealing in terms of their arts background and perhaps their approachability in dealing with the larger public, and became members of these boards of directors. That's a long way from what I said I was going to talk about. But again, I have to prove my doctoral stripes, that we can go from a question, how did those guys get there? That we can go through a course of analysis using sound material from different sources, bring that material together and figure it out. Wouldn't it be nice if all life was that easy? It's that complicated. How do we make it easier? The 3 roads that I have found that move individuals forward, not just on boards of directors, which is a temporal thing after all, but through all of life's stages. From our younger years when we're trying to plan and figure out what lies ahead of us, to those years when we finally landed that job and now we're getting a little bored of it, we've been doing it year after year after year, to the time when we realize that most of our career is past, or all of it's past. And what do we face in the future? Seeing a world change behind us. The footsteps that we thought we were making for our younger generation no longer serve that generation because of all of the changes that have happened. And then on top of that, the community at large seems to change, seems to be more cantankerous, seems to be more ready to fight with one another, seems to have a hard time disagreeing on anything. And we search for how to make our life more direct and lasting, not feeling like we have to hold our breath when we wake up every morning just to see what's going to hit us. The 3 roads that I found that are reliable for planning a future in such an uncertain and complicated world are first, a road that takes us to be more grounded in our own faith. Without anything else, that one road takes us so far. Of course, we've managed to gum it up. We've managed to divide out into every possible denomination and division that we possibly can. And we've also managed to separate ourselves from other people of faith who hold a different method in their tradition and worship. My concern is that the more we focus on being able to develop and engage in our faith commitments, the more suited we are for the long run, even though the world is complex and sometimes scary. I brought with me a pamphlet that I love. Granted, it's small. It's called Interfaith Inspirations. It was actually created at the University of California, Santa Barbara, my hometown. And it does a beautiful job of comparing similar sentiments, deep-held sentiments and traditions of faith from different faiths around the world, and shows the similarities. I wanted to share one or two pieces with you today. Now, we grow up as children knowing the golden rule. Christianity from Ephesians would state it, be angry but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil, right? Interestingly enough, if we were to move to look at the tradition of Judaism, of course, our Christianity is based on Judaism beginning, their Proverbs is reflected there. Proverbs 27, a stone is heavy and the sand weighty, but a fool's anger is heavier than both. Very similar. Moving over to another tradition that we often find ourselves in conflict with, Islam, the prophet says, the strong man is not the good wrestler. No, the strong man is only he who controls himself when he is angry. Okay? Each of the large issues that we face, whether it is love your neighbor and control your anger, or it is sharing what you have and expressing compassion, whether it is moving to courage and charity, each is reflected in the major religious beliefs around the world. Now, yes, I understand that we have our doctrines to protect, that we have our faith traditions to hang on to. But when we take a global comparison of the values that we live by, we find that they cross all boundaries. Geological boundaries, boundaries of philosophy, even boundaries of age that can be explained to that young lady that we talked to earlier today, as well as to a person of many years and great experience. Finding your faith, defining it, and finding other people who are supportive of you in your faith is particularly important in this complex world, when we are so prone to being afraid of what's going to happen tomorrow. In our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our capital, we understand that conflict is with us everywhere, and yet so is the ability of our faith to bring peace and conversation to us, to give us courage to go forward. Now, there are two other roads that I want to discuss briefly, because having our faith, being confident in who we are and where we come from and where we're going ultimately, gives us one type of strength to face a changing world. But there are two other qualities that won't change over time that really help us to advance when we're facing tough decisions, when we are facing choices. The first, I have to say I am partial to, it is the ability to speak. The ability to communicate and not be afraid of using your voice. A psychologist would say, owning your agency, using your voice, your opinions, your ability to communicate with one another is one of the best skills to invest in. When we have that skill, we're able to not only express ourselves, to assist others, and to lead in a direction that is going to be good for the whole. But people will resist speaking out, especially when afraid. So if we are limited in a complex world, if we have no faith to step into, to know that we are secure with, if we have no voice to speak, then we are creating a worse situation, not only for ourselves, but for others. The third level, and we might say, well, I know a lot of people who probably speak out more than they should. The third balances that, and that is the ability to listen. In the work that I did at the University of Santa Clara in counseling psychology, we went through so many exercises in listening. And for a while in our society, it was very, very popular to listen to the words that were coming and to assess the person that was talking to you. So much so that it's almost become a touchy-feely kind of a sentiment. And we're quick to speak and very slow to listen. But the onus that comes to us from our first road, the road of faith, tells us that we're supposed to spend as much time listening as speaking, as much time hearing the needs of others, as much time assessing what we can do to serve others. And if we are only promoting our own agenda, if we are only speaking on our own behalf, on the people that think and live exactly as we live and think, then we have lost a tremendous amount in our society and in our own souls. The array of creation is amazing. We all know that. Students here study that array of creation and the complexity not only on the scene, but on the internal assessment of our organs, of our lifeblood, humans and all of the animals and all of creation. To be able to appreciate that, to communicate, to listen, to react, these are three roads that take us forward no matter how the wind blows, no matter what tomorrow brings, whether it's natural disaster or political winds blowing hard, whether it is the concern and unrest that we see in our communities, or just the sadness that grabs us inside that has no name. The ability to hold on to a faith that is shared with others, to speak our mind and not be silent in our strength, but to share our strength, and to hear when someone is in need, and to react to that need. These are the three strengths, the three roads that take us forward in a complex world. One thing we know for sure, life is short. You have seen, even in the course of the history of this school, generations come and go. And we know that we have only so much time on earth, that our children will grow quickly, that our students will graduate quickly, that our lives will pass before us before we even know it. When we close our services where I worship, we are always saying, life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel with us. Be swift to love, make haste to be kind, and may the love of God, who made us, who loves us, and who travels with us, be with you now and forever. Thank you. Thank you. I am happy to take questions, and I want to show you three other items that I didn't use in my audio-visual items. Recommendations for you, no matter where you are on your journey of faith. Parker Palmer, Let Your Life Speak, an excellent source. An excellent source, especially in his work, Listening for the Voice and Vocation for Students. Frederick Buechner, a known theologian, has a lovely way of saying that God's intention for our lives is the place where our greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. Buchner and others are highlighted each term in Reflections, the publication from the Yale Divinity School. Timely topics that come to us, this one about the environment and our religious beliefs, are covered in that publication, so that when I speak of hanging on to our faith and digging deep, it's not just about theology, it's about all of life. And when I speak from authority, having written Women Seen and Heard. My colleague Lois Phillips and I, also from the UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, produced Women Seen and Heard as a guidebook for women taking leadership in their communities. And it has been used as a text around the country and now around the world in leadership programs that we've done in many countries in Africa and Latin America, in Europe, and even in the Far East. These are all guideposts that fit into containing our faith with strength, moving our voice out into the community, and listening with compassion. And I wanted to share each of those with you tonight. Questions, comments? I'm happy to entertain those from my fellow Oilers.
Thank you very much. Just trying to reflect on the experiences that my wife and I have had. Mm-hmm. I am assuming that when you speak of a religious faith, it is not necessarily a particular sectarian faith, but it's more of a type of faith that is universal, that cuts across various creeds, various cultures. Am I correct?
You are correct in that while I am a practicing Christian in the Anglican community or the Episcopal community, I brought this booklet on the Interfaith Inspirations to really demonstrate how our principles and values, if not our specific doctrines, cross all cultures and all time periods. The representative communities that are in this particular compilation come from the Baha'i faith, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, Sikhism, and Taoism, and Zoroastrianism. That pretty much covers the waterfront when we move around the world. And each starts with that commitment to the precious earth and the preciousness of humanness, with the powerful forces that come from our creation, that respect for the creation and respect from one another. From there stems all culture and all value. And when we cross those boundaries or cut off the links, stems all sadness and all complexity.
My wife and I were involved in teaching creative problem solving for about 13 years in Buffalo, New York, for the Creative Problem Solving Institute. And there's a part of the model that we used, the Osborne-Parnes model, where it's idea finding. You haven't reached a solution yet, but you're utilizing people from dispersed backgrounds and various types of personalities. The more diverse, the better. Of course, initially, maybe when you're trying to form your group, there's a bit of storming involved.
That's it.
But you have to reform before you can perform to get the job done. Mm-hmm. And it seems as though what you were saying can be tied in very well with the whole creativity movement, or the creativity movement can be tied in with your movement.
Mm-hmm. It's so true that first we get into we had those terms for many years, the storming and then the norming, as you come together, and somehow we got locked into the storming here. And we're still storming. But history tells us that as we work together across our boundaries, or our imagined boundaries sometimes, that we get to the point where we see the common goals and reach the common good. Thank you for sharing that. Other questions, comments? One of the sidetracks that, I say it's a sidetrack, Lord knows I'll go back to it sometime, that happened for me when I finished my PhD was that I was ready for a little downtime. And I booked a cruise, okay? And it was not a big cruise, but it was reasonable enough. And I thought, I'm going to bring folks along with me. So I created a curriculum on the cruise. I had a cruise seminar, and it was actually not for young students, but for adults finishing the bulk of their career. It was called Setting Your Sail for a New Decade. It turned out to be one of the most stimulating experiences for our little group that engaged in some conversation and seminar and journaling work all along the beautiful coastline that we were cruising on. And I found some excellent sources, especially Composing a Further Life, The Age of Active Wisdom by Mary Catherine Bateson, to be a great lead for that. Changing Directions Without Losing Your Way by Paul and Sarah Edwards. Wonderful information for people who are turning the course in their life, past their youth, past their standard career, and thinking, what's next? How do I go forward? And then finally, the wonderful work from Mark Friedman on the Encore group called Finding Work That Matters in the Second Half of Life. And what did I do? I started lecturing again. Well, one of the wonderful pieces that came from Paul and Sarah Edwards, I'm going to read to you as I close here. And it's in our last section, towards the end of the cruise, we had a section of work called Hope and Possibility. And this actually does work for students as well as persons that have already accomplished a great degree in their life. Even if you are eager to change, you may unconsciously resist moving through. Most people do. You may unknowingly sabotage your own efforts to make the very changes you want to make. In trying to change directions, it's easy to get lost in options. Works for students, works for adults. We may see the future as a barren desert with no appealing choices, or as a tropical jungle with far too many options from which to choose. We may hop on the bandwagon of whatever's hot at the moment, only to end up having to change directions again. One of the most important tools for changing directions without losing your way is a clear sense of who you are as a person. The knowledge of your true self can always be an inner compass directing you toward the most desirable path in your life. May it be so for all of you. Thank you.
UFTV is your university and community TV station.